Oh, wait. I wanted to watch this video. I don't know. I've heard mixed things about this guy. Cappy Army. However, he made a video called Why Ukraine is Suddenly Pushing Forward. And I just wanted to watch it because I've heard
in early February,
mixed signals about what's going on in Ukraine and Russia. And at the very least, he's got ground footage and news articles. So I'm going to watch it. I'm interested in hearing more. Obviously, I am biased towards the hopeful opinion that Ukraine. I have been thinking that a horrible economic disaster for Russia and a true slog that Ukraine isn't really winning so much as being slowly ground down. However, if there are, it would be interesting to hear about. I do want to say, before I watch this video, a couple updates. Look, this shit pisses me off. Honestly, I'm angry about it. We've been dropping all of the oil sanctions on Russia. Okay? This at the same time as oil prices go through the roof and make them a ton of money. So the combination of that plus Putin at the exact same time helping Iran, okay? They're literally giving intelligence to Iranian strikes to strike U.S. military, and that Trump is helping them make more money than ever. This stupid war in Iran is making Russia the biggest beneficiary. And at the same time, we're lessening their sanctions, and Trump is admitting that they're helping Iran. Okay? On the same time as that, most of the warfare being fought in Iran is asynchronous or asymmetric drone warfare. Cheaply made launched drones in Iran, taking out tankers and things like that. We don't know how to fight that cost effectively. The way the American military fights drones is with expensive ass missiles that lose cost effectively. And so we've been getting help from fucking Ukraine. So Ukraine, while they're fighting their own war that we are no longer supporting them with, and in fact are helping their enemy, even though Ukraine should be our ally, we are asking for their help. And so Ukraine is giving drone expertise. So literally this year, this is not a joke, this year so far, Ukraine has given more aid to the U.S. than the U.S. has given to Ukraine. The fucking, that is absurd. They're in the middle of a life-threatening war with Russia, and we're getting more aid from them. Have we said thank you? I'm so glad you said that because I had this meme. But it's not funny. It's fucked. It's crazy. It is ridiculous. Like, the years of war they've been through have made them absolute experts at drone warfare. They know how to fight it cheaply. They know how to make drones. They know how to use drones. Like, drone warfare and Ukraine expertise hand in hand. And so we're now desperate for that knowledge, and they're providing it as an ally at the same time as we are not helping them and helping their ally get billions of dollars. Russia is making a desperately needed economic lifeline from massive oil price increases from the Strait of Hormuz. So it's just a fustercluck, dude. So if in all that there's some good news about how Ukraine's doing, I would love to hear it. Because obviously all I'm seeing is like bad. So I would love to see if there's some good progress from Ukraine out of their own, I don't know, heroism or ability. That would be awesome.
In early February, something shocking happened. Russian military communications suddenly went dark. Russian soldiers lost access to their most critical capabilities, including coordinating artillery and drone fire. Can you hear me now, Hua? The American company SpaceX had just kneecapped them by turning off Russian access to the communications network. But how did this happen? Was it the company's CEO Elon Musk who made the decision, or is it really the US government and the Pentagon making the ultimate call? Will Moscow be able to find a replacement solution quickly? I'm your average infantryman, Chris Cappy. Let's find out. For Russian units at the line of contact on the zero line in Ukraine, the blackout had near instantaneous disastrous effects. Russian commanders were unable to issue orders from the top down, and then their units started firing on each other due to lack of knowing where friendlies were located. To make matters even worse for them, their backup systems were being jammed by their own electronic warfare due to having no coordination. One intercepted radio communication from a Russian soldier said, quote, "All we've got left now are radios, cables, and pigeons." During the comms blackout, they reclaimed over 400 kilometers within just the first 5 days. Ukrainian troops were able to advance that far. And to put that into context, that's about 10% of what Russia gained in all of 2025. These are marginal gains, and Russia still still advancing and has the clear advantage on the battlefield.
Okay.
But this is a shocking...
Well, okay, that's okay. At 1 minute in, I'm already sad again. Because that was my understanding. Okay, you know, obviously this is a tactical win, and I'm glad, but that is frustrating to hear. And I don't think this is, you know, this is dates from before they started making $1 billion extra of oil money a day. I don't know. It is
development
this
that
Iran
raises
stuff is
a
bad
ton
on
of
like every level.
important questions. One Ukrainian aerial reconnaissance operator, call sign Mustang, said, quote, "On the Russian side, we observed on the very first day Starlink was shut down that artillery and mortar fire dropped drastically. Drone drops and FPV attacks also suddenly decreased. I'd be pretty useless without a connection too." All of this is because of this tiny device here, the Starlink terminal made by SpaceX. It gives soldiers the ability to operate their greatest weapons, drones, artillery coordination,
Starlink is
comms,
crazy.
all
It's
done
really cool.
in remote battlefield locations that often have little to no infrastructure surviving. It connects to a constellation of low Earth orbit satellites overhead. So the way it works is it relays encrypted data between the terminal and ground stations that are tied into this global
Not
internet,
MAGA.
creating a fast, portable, broad link
it's a good piece of
almost
technology.
anywhere on Earth. Basically, it's very hard to kill people without it. As soon as the outage hit forward deployed Russian units, they started trying to get Ukrainian soldiers to sell their access codes to their Starlink terminals. It's like those scammers that call you 10 times a day. Ukrainian forces were already positioned in advance to take advantage of the Russian chaos, though. They had anticipated this was coming and had in fact coordinated it. But how did Ukraine use this to trick Russian soldiers, and who really ordered the closure of Starlink? All the animation work in this video is sponsored by drone clone experts. A lot of guys that I know who play airsoft or who regularly do police and military training are incorporating this type of drone into their top right.
Is it an ad for a drone? Drone clone experts? Are you trying to sell to the military?
Go to dronecloneexperts.com. Ukraine's cyber warfare division then created a fake Starlink registration service in order to trick Russian soldiers into giving up their sensitive data, basically getting them to dox themselves and give up their locations on the battlefield. In the Russians' desperation to reconnect to access to the network, they were fooled into giving thousands of dollars to the Ukrainian armed forces, which they thought was a service fee to get reconnected. And they sent over packets of information that in that data, it revealed their geolocation coordinates. So Russian soldiers were trying to beg, borrow, and steal and bribe their way back into the network because Ukrainian agents were pretending to help them reconnect to Starlink devices. They then began firing on the positions of the now defunct Russian Starlink terminals. These issues were compounded by the fact that the Russian way of war operates really on this top-down method, so supplies don't reach units. Units can't conduct offensive actions without those daily orders from the top. This top-down system, don't get me wrong, it has its benefits in many cases, but it can be more ineffective when the communications are lost. Russia has managed to skirt US sanctions by shipping Starlink terminals into their country.
Yeah, Pablo Torres showed this, right? It was like some NBA team owner, and their company was just taking calls from people. Like they did a fake, it was the Grizzlies. He like co-owned a company that sold these terminals, and they did a test, like a honeypot test, where they had someone call with a Russian accent and say, "Hey, I need to buy a bunch of these, but I can't ship them directly to Russia. Can you help me get them over the border or whatever?" And they were like, "Oh yeah, we can do that, no problem." And they recorded it all. And it was like, damn, I didn't know the fucking Grizzlies were behind this.
Through third parties in other nations like Kazakhstan, then they distribute them to the front line. So Russian soldiers found these terminals to work better than a lot of their homegrown comms equipment. Since 2024, the Russian military has started to incorporate satellite internet into their force structure with the Starlink system. The only problem for them was that these Starlink terminals weren't supposed to be in Russia to begin with. So the strategic benefit for the US to allow this to happen, though, was that it made Russia dependent on tech that they held the keys to. The Russian military began to rely on these unauthorized Starlink terminals more and more, basically becoming addicted to the tech. But this proved to be a blunder. Relying on a civilian communication service from a foreign nation for critical military operations at all levels is a vulnerability that it doesn't take a friggin' 4-star general to figure out. An average infantryman could see that. So what is the official story for how the decision was made to cut the service access? According to one account of events, Ukrainian authorities investigated a deadly attack on a passenger train in Kharkiv on January 27th, and they discovered that one of these black market Starlink terminals was in the drone wreckage.
By this drone made in Iran, by the way. These are the Iranian drones.
Then there was an attempted assassination drone strike against Ukrainian President Zelensky. And as the official story goes, that was the final straw. And Ukraine's defense minister, Fedorov, then presented Elon Musk with this documented evidence of Russian forces using Starlink to operate these long-range drones. And then Elon Musk then ordered SpaceX to shut down any unauthorized Starlink terminals that wasn't properly registered on what's called a whitelist. So only Ukraine could access these terminals now, and ones that were in Russian hands without access codes were blacklisted and basically bricked. They were as good as frickin' paperweights. So within a matter of a couple of hours, Russian battlefield communications collapsed, and since they had no backup plan, no plan B, the results were catastrophic. At least that's what the official story says, but that doesn't make complete sense to me. Why would Elon Musk, the owner of Starlink, suddenly turn around and decide on his own after 2 years out of nowhere to shut the service down, after first allowing the entire Russian army to become dependent on the service? Why would he then suddenly turn around? Was it because they had tried to kill just one too many people? For 2 whole years, similar attacks have been made by Russia with no changes.
Elon Musk has a limit of innocent deaths that will happen under his watch of this technology. And once it hit the limit...
But who ultimately controls access to this very vital system for both armies?
And what is this map? This is the Starlink map? This is crazy.
Is it one man or is it a government? It's easy to forget that just a year ago in 2025, there were reports that the US government was threatening to turn off Starlink for Ukrainian armed forces if they didn't sign a minerals deal. The point of this is that when the US government was in these behind doors negotiations, they threatened to...
The amount of like bullying and fucking that we do to our side of this conflict is crazy. It's upside down, dude.
Cut off access to the Ukrainian armed forces. And it happened while I was reporting from the front lines in Ukraine. So I asked soldiers there at the front what they thought of the Starlink device. Every single unit I spoke to said they relied on it heavily on these terminals that were outside every single one of their safe houses. They depended on them to keep drone feeds live and to get target coordinates. I saw them using it every day. So soldiers I spoke to said they would be absolutely without it. I asked, well, couldn't you just get another workaround? And they said another solution would suck and would basically take forever to set up. And this isn't the first time that the US government has used Starlink to tip the scales in the war by any means. In 2022, just a few days after Russia invaded the country, the Starlink service went live in Ukraine for free for the whole nation. It was actually used to connect the Ukrainian military to the US Joint Special Operations Command, who helped them with targeting Russian positions early in the war. It was used to see live video feeds to adjust artillery fire coordinates, and without it, the country may have fallen very quickly to Moscow. However, here's where it gets kind of strange, I think. During the first Ukrainian counter...
I don't think this is paid by Starlink. I think Starlink has been legitimately very useful in the conflict in Ukraine. I mean, it was... They're using it in Iran, too. The regular city, like, it's used all over. It's just the... It's a good product, honestly. Satellite internet, it's good.
Offensive in September 2022, as Ukraine soldiers took back and recovered.
Like, there's so many things I dog on Elon Musk for, but I'm not going to dog on him for being the CEO of a company that made a good product like this. Or the fucking rocket catch. You know, those are cool things. I think they're the product of very talented engineers that worked at those companies.
Sections of territory, the Russian army was in full retreat. They left behind hundreds of vehicles. If you remember, thousands were killed. It was starting to look like the front line may collapse and might turn into a strategic defeat for Russia for a moment.
And of course, the Cybertruck. You know, the big three. The rocket catch, Starlink, and the Cybertruck. There's 3 products I'll never talk shit on because they're just perfect. They're flawless. And they've done incredible jobs. Yep. And
suddenly, when Ukraine was pushing forward the hardest, somehow Starlink stopped working. It was a catastrophic loss of communications for them. but it only stopped working when soldiers got close to or beyond the Russian front line, almost like they were being contained in their advance. Coincidentally, the Starlink access was turned off literally the day after Russia signaled to America that they were going to use a nuclear weapon. We later found out US intelligence had learned Russia was seriously considering using a nuke. So Starlink was coincidentally shut off right as the Ukrainian army was advancing too far, too fast, right as the US government was concerned about nuclear retaliation. This was at the time categorized as Elon Musk tipping the scales of the war. The media ran headlines that a billionaire was deciding the outcome of a major conflict. But is it Elon Musk's decision? Or is it the US government pulling the strings behind the scenes?
Yeah, probably.
The terminals used by any military are actually a separate service called Starshield. And according to Elon Musk himself, quote, Starlink needs to be a civilian network, not to participate in combat. Starshield will be owned by the US government and controlled by the US Space Force. This is the right order of things, end quote, from Elon Musk. So the US government also is responsible for paying for much of Starlink's Ukraine operations since early 2022. The Department of Defense and US tax dollars covers the cost of running the service in Ukraine.
So
according to public records, Starlink is
sense.
subject to national security reviews by the US government authorities. And on top of that, US export law and sanctions constrain the service. So what we've seen is that every single time when the service is shut off for Ukraine or for Russia, it has always lined up with the US government's strategic interests. If it were the US government that was behind all of this, why wouldn't they take overt credit? Because there is a value to having a layer of plausible deniability between these actions.
Yeah.
The US government doesn't take the heat for the decisions, which could impact foreign.
Well, it's also like if they think it's a separate service, they might actually use it, which they did, which gives you power to cut it off. Like Russia getting dependent on it is why this was a big move. If it was called the US military Department of Defense Starshield, they just wouldn't have used it. And then you wouldn't have had any
relations or negotiations. This is evidence it's not Musk making these decisions about Starlink's access. It's the US government telling him what moves to make. And it's a strategic decision to get Russia hooked on the tech and then to turn it off. If we zoom out for a second, I think the answer becomes more obvious. The ongoing negotiations between the US and Russian governments to end the war has not been going well. Increasingly, the US has slowly applied increasing pressure on Moscow in an attempt to get them to consider a peace deal to end the war.
Until now.
Sanctioning more oil, sending Ukraine targeting data to destroy Russia's oil infrastructure, and targeting data on Russia's shadow fleet. US troops have been capturing Russia's shadow fleet oil tankers. All of these moves are connected. I believe the decision to cut off Russia's access to Starlink right.
They were connected up until when? Up until the Iran war? At which point all of it went out the window? I mean, I'm not saying there wasn't somebody in the Pentagon or Rubio or whatever who tried to like coordinate up the pressure, but what's happening now is a complete 180, dude. It's never been better. What's happening in the Middle East is like so good for Russia.
This moment right now is not coincidence, and it was likely not made by Elon Musk. It was made by the US government as part of a broader strategy to pressure Russia into ending the war. This battlefield tech is another piece of leverage that's being used. And now that the Ukrainian forces have been losing territory in the past 2 years, this gives Putin little reason to end the war without added pressure. And the question is, will it work or will it backfire? Because now in early March, Russia has recorded their slowest territorial gains in nearly 2 years. They're racing to find a replacement solution, though. The Kremlin has turned to a balloon-based 5G network as a kind of interim fix. These balloon platforms carry signals into the stratosphere.
They're using balloons,
Beyond that, Russia's looking to launch their first batch of low-orbit broadband internet satellites under a project that's meant to rival SpaceX Starlink. It's going to be 16 satellites. Originally, it was supposed to go up in 2025, but now it's been pushed back into 2026. Whatever the case may be, once those satellites are up, it appears they will have an alternative. The sudden change on the battlefield goes beyond connectivity,
That's
though,
a good
because
name.
American fighter pilots are now fighting in Ukraine. And they sprinted across the flight line, they jumped into the cockpit of an F-16, and they locked in. Their flight briefing explained their mission is to...
Everyone's like, big, this is your moment. And I'm like, what do you mean? You mean I need to use my balloon skills to pop Russia's internet balloons? We need to send me and Quincy behind enemy lines with a bag full of darts. Holy shit, you're right. This is my calling. Now's my fucking moment. Quincy, we need one last job. This one's for your father.
Intercept 425 incoming Russian attack drones and missiles that are aimed at Ukraine's power grid. Their squadron was located in a remote makeshift airfield in western Ukraine. The US pilots' airfields here are untraditional compared to what they're used to, always located on the side of highways and in unassuming farmland. It was how they survived being hunted by Russian surveillance and missile attacks. New reports from Intelligence Online, and then rerun in many other sources, is that there's a new squadron made up of a mix of American and Dutch pilots who are now flying combat missions in Ukraine. And this is one of the reasons why Ukraine is suddenly advancing now, because one of the former US military pilots is a veteran of combat missions in Afghanistan, and another was reportedly blowing shit up all over the Middle East. They are serving in Ukraine's defense on a temporary contract, and this is not as unusual as it sounds, because during the Vietnam and Korean War, the Soviets sent hundreds of instructors and pilots to secretly assist against the American Air Force. Soviet pilots were posted to various Middle Eastern nations to covertly assist in combat against Israeli pilots, and American pilots were sent to China during World War II, famously the Flying Tigers, to help against Japan. In this case, however, these are former pilots who are allegedly no longer officially part of the US military, and they are dedicated to flying air defense missions, which is similar to the type of assignments Soviet pilots were given in Vietnam against the Americans. So according to reports, these US and Dutch pilots are daily intercepting the massive Russian night attacks. They're shooting down KH-101 missiles and attack drones. Footage was just released showing the first time one of the F-16s used a low-cost guided rocket to intercept a Russian munition. It shouldn't come as a shock to us, but for some reason the use of pilots seems like an escalation. We know that American and European veterans already serve as volunteers in Ukraine's ground forces for years. In fact, U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham once suggested that Ukraine hire former U.S. fighter pilots to fly their newly delivered F-16s. But since they are such a highly trained and sensitive asset, and since their services as pilots are often under strict export arms controls, it comes as a shock to us. When U.S. former fighter pilots train Chinese pilots, for instance, they get arrested. That's how sensitive this information is. I haven't seen former special forces guys who train Chinese soldiers ever get arrested for it. The former NATO...
That's a bummer, because I was going to tell my dad if he needs money in retirement, he should go to China and train people in how to fly U.S. jets. That was my backup plan for him. But now, I don't know what he's going to do.
Pilots are hired on 6-month contracts, which is more than just a coincidence. When Ukrainian pilots that have transitioned over to the F-16 from former Soviet jets have done an incredible job at adapting to the new aircraft, it's also true that the training pipeline for basic familiarity for the F-16 platform takes around 6 months. And even then, many of the F-16's more sophisticated systems, like its sniper targeting pod, take more experience to master and reach their full potential. So retired US and Dutch pilots...
Why not just put it all in Claude's hands? Why not just toss it all over to Claude or ChatGPT? You know what I'm saying? And just let it fly it around. Many people have been saying this. Get this guy in office. Fuck it. Put it in Grok, dude. Give a billion-dollar fighter jet to Grok and just let it
have rip. That experience. They know the F-16's flight systems and the operational components of how to make a formation of F-16s excel in any air defense mission. So putting older but seasoned NATO pilots in the air reduces the pressure on Ukraine to take their own veterans off their Soviet platforms that they're already familiar with, giving new Air Force recruits the chance to train on Western systems from the start. It's a smart idea that keeps more pilots in the air flying jets they already know, while the next generation of Ukrainian pilots get the training that they need. It may have been one of these NATO veterans flying the F-16 that scored that incredible close-range kill against a Russian drone just a few weeks ago. To date, 3 Ukrainian F-16 pilots have been killed in action since jets first started flying in the Ukrainian Air Force back in August of 2020.
Think about these drone strikes. These things are so expensive and the drones are so cheap. I guess I just don't I feel like war is still not fully pricing in how dominant drones are. I feel like it's still not getting it.
The loss of a former U.S. fighter pilot could trigger an even more severe diplomatic confrontation. And that's why, so far, Ukraine and the West have opted to keep the pilot volunteer program secret, if it even exists at all. For the first 2 years of the war, the U.S. restricted Ukraine from using any American-made weapons to hit targets in Russia, which was a compromise that U.S. politicians made to avoid escalation with Russia, but was a constant headache for Ukraine commanders who couldn't strike inside Russian troop formations until after they'd already crossed the border and started to attack. So Germany still refuses to send Ukraine their missiles that could hit inside Russia for that same reason, even this late into the war. And to address that vulnerability, Ukraine has been investing into its own domestic defense industry as much as they can, and it's another reason why Ukraine is suddenly advancing on the battlefield now. Because in early February, Ukrainian defense firm Firepoint unveiled their FP7 and FP9 ballistic missiles. These are inspired by the American ATACMS, and Firepoint is designed FP series of missiles to do the same type of long-range strike missions, but at a lower cost and without foreign targeting restrictions. This video from February 20th shows one of these Flamingo missiles hitting a Russian missile plant in Vakinsk. That's more than 800 kilometers beyond the border. On the other side, Russia has had their war economy in overdrive for years already. Most of the country's factories, industrial output, and fiscal...
We said this before, but I think it's the most staggering stat, which is that the war in Ukraine for Russia has lasted longer than the Eastern Front did in World War II. That's crazy. This is like their longest. It's a real, and for no real progress. I mean, it's a forever war for them, similarly to like a fucking Afghanistan or Iraq. It's kind of like a Vietnam, yeah.
Policy is focused solely on the war effort now. Just under 40% of Russia's entire federal budget goes directly to military and state security services. So on top of that, 9% of the remaining budget goes to interest payments for government loans that finance the war.
So half of all money in the
entire government financial resources tied in the war. That immense amount of government spending on the military has grown the defense industry and kept Russia's relentless offensive pace, but at the cost of non-defense related business and economic growth. Economists are now warning that the sugar rush of defense spending could have the opposite effect on Russia's post-war economy. Instead of boosting the wider economy through foreign sales, Russia has overinvested in the defense sector so much that the instant the war ends, it could trigger a recession as the demand for weapons shrinks. All of that is, of course, unless Russia wins the war, which is one of the reasons why Putin is pushing so hard to annex all of Ukraine, and not just the territory already controlled by the Russian military. It's a gamble that his nation can outlast Western tolerance for the war, and that the spoils of Ukraine will offset the economic slump that follows the war when it finally ends.
Spoils of Ukraine.
And that makes it even harder to judge who's winning the war at this point. While Ukraine loses territory, it forces Russia to dig itself in deeper into an economic hole that could take years to recover from. And even as Russia suffers tremendous casualties, it continues to rack up strategic victories and project strength, both at home and to the rest of the world. But these are some of the reasons why Ukraine is advancing on the battlefield after losing territory for the past 2 years. Let me know what you guys think in the comments section down below. If you like this video...
I mean, not really as positive as the title might lead you to believe. What I will say is the thing we could control on the American side is to be as supportive as possible, and we haven't been, and not even close. That's what I am frustrated with. Attempting to bring both sides to a peaceful settlement is something, but to do it in a way where we are now openly benefiting Russia at the expense of Ukraine is crazy. How about I slay the Spire run? I gotta bounce back. That's kind of sad, actually. I genuinely feel bad for Ukraine, man. It's just tough.